When Street Fighter II: The World Warrior was released back in 1991, it took the arcades by storm. It was so popular, in fact, that most arcades had several Street Fighter II machines, and that dominance continued as subsequent revisions and hacks flooded the scene. Like Championship Edition, Hyper Fighting, and the bootleg Rainbow sets. If you're in a particular age bracket and spent any time at all in the arcades, chances are you've played Street Fighter II, and if, like me, you spent a little too much time in the arcades, you probably still remember how to play the game. Maybe you can even pull off some combos, a feature, or bug depending who you ask, that largely originated with this game. But there's something that's puzzled me about the original Street Fighter II for all 35 years of its existence. What is it exactly that's going on in the code of the game that leads to this? Or this? Or this? Or this? And famously, this. And then finally, most important of all, to me anyway, this. These are all glitches in the World Warrior that people have known about since shortly after the game was released. I've seen them documented in various places across the internet over the years, although that last Invincibility glitch seems to be relatively unknown. And yet, I've never come across a great explanation of what's really going on in the game that leads to these bugs. Most descriptions just refer to the fact that the game has slippery timing windows and input buffers, allowing one move to cancel into another. That's true, of course, and is basically why combos were even possible, but it doesn't really feel satisfying or complete. So, in this video, I'm going to go over each of the glitches and describe what's really happening in the game's code that causes them to happen. And don't worry if you don't know anything about coding, I'm not a programmer, so I'm aiming to provide explanations without getting too tangled in coding jargon. With that said, I will refer to pieces of relevant code at times because I think they strengthen the explanations, and because they're probably of interest to some people. Before we get underway, just a couple of quick points to note. First, there are several revisions and additions of Street Fighter II, and the various glitches are present or absent across them. I'm going to focus here on World Warrior Revision 910522, in which all the glitches you just saw are present. But I won't be covering some other glitches from other revisions, like Dalsim's Invisibility, or Dalsim's Reset. Second, I won't be covering every glitch on revision 910522 either, just the ones from that earlier footage. These are the major glitches that have occupied space in my mind since I was an obsessed child. I had a lot of fun investigating these glitches though, so if there's something that's not covered here that you're dying to know about, let me know. Let's begin with the only glitch I'm going to cover that doesn't involve the broken mess that is Guile. When you beat the third opponent in this game, you're taken to a bonus stage, where the goal is to destroy some poor sucker's car.
Oh my god!
Once you've smashed one side of the car, if you then turn around, jump backwards, and hit the car at one very precise moment, you'll get stuck in an endless loop, desperately trying to break that which cannot be broken. So, what's going on here? Well, first we need to talk about rectangles. Each character, including the car, has a bunch of hidden rectangles that are used to determine, amongst other things, the areas they are vulnerable and the area of their attacks. These rectangles are normally invisible, but with a little bit of scripting magic, we can reveal them, and they'll help us see what's causing the glitch. So, the player presses the attack button at a moment in time when their jump is at a specific height. The attack's rectangle only just overlaps with the car's vulnerable area, and we get the expected hit. Behind the scenes, the game is constantly checking to see whether the current type of hit, we'll call it blocked here, is the same as, or different to, the type of hit that was calculated 1/60th of a second, or 1 frame, earlier. We'll call that missed here. This check ensures that a new attack only hits once. If the current and previous hit types match, then nothing's changed, and the game carries on. But if they're different, then the game makes a mental note of the type of new hit, and as long as it's not missed, then it locks the player in place for the next 14 frames while that hit plays out. Now, ordinarily, once that 14-frame window has elapsed, the hit is over, the player recovers, and they continue along their jump trajectory. The question now is, why doesn't that recovery happen from this one specific spot? And here's where the rectangles give us part of the answer. See how the car's rectangle is cycling up and down here over time. That's important, because while that's happening, the game is also regularly performing collision detection. It's checking the overlap between the rectangles. And when the rectangles overlap, like they normally do on every one of the 14 freeze frames, the game simply goes on to check, has this attack already hit? If the answer is yes, then the 14-frame countdown continues. But at one very specific jump height, the player's attack rectangle and the car's vulnerability rectangle will sometimes have an overlap difference of exactly 0. And this is where things go gloriously wrong. Here, the game does something different. It detects that the rectangles do not overlap, which is another way of saying an attack isn't hitting anything, and so the game resets its mental note about the attack, to say that it has not hit yet. Ordinarily, that would make sense. During a hit, the rectangles should always be overlapping, because they're supposed to be frozen in place for 14 frames. So, this piece of code should only run once that's done and some new attack is being made. But the problem is that the car refuses to play by the rules. Its rectangles move slightly every frame. As a result, the next time the game asks, has this attack already hit? The answer isn't yes anymore. It's no, and now the game does something different. It erases its memory of the previous type of hit. You could also think of this instruction as the game's way of saying, when I last checked, this attack wasn't hitting anything. Uh-oh. Maybe you can already anticipate what happens next. The rectangles overlap again almost immediately, and so the game now cycles back to that first piece of code, comparing the current hit type, which hasn't changed because the attack never made it through all 14 freeze frames, with the previous hit type, which has changed. The two are different from each other again, so the game freezes the player in place for 14 frames again, effectively starting the whole process over. And that's really all there is to it. Every 7 frames or so, the rectangles won't overlap because of the car misbehaving and not staying frozen. That causes the game to forget the previous hit type, making it different to the current hit type. That in turn sets the freeze timer back to 14 again. The result is that the player gets stuck in an infinite loop. If you're not already familiar with this glitch, there's a couple of points to note here. First, it's not as easy as it looks to pull off. The backwards jump and the timing of the attack can both take a bit of practice. And, due to different rectangle sizes and height changes across attack and movement animations, only certain attacks are capable of producing the glitch. Second, if the glitch happens, it's basically game over. The bonus stage timer continues to tick down to 0, but the game can't progress any further while the player is stuck. There are only 2 ways to break out of the loop. One way is to reset the game. The other way is to have a second player present. They can help you recover from the glitch in a friendly way by damaging or jumping on the car, which shifts the rectangles enough for that 14-frame countdown to reach 0. Or, alternatively, they can choose violence. Guile is hands down the most broken character in World Warrior. His glitches range from those that don't really do much of anything, other than maybe looking kinda funky, to those that are completely broken. Mastering some of these glitches was a real dopamine rush back when the game was in its heyday, although it quickly became frowned upon to use the glitches on human opponents. For each of Guile's glitches, I'll first describe how to make it happen, then I'll explain what causes it. I'll also talk a little bit about some of the nuances of the glitches. Before we dive in though, let me quickly explain a game mechanic that we'll be referring to repeatedly. Every character in Street Fighter 2 has special attacks that happen when you input particular joystick and button combinations. Some of these special attacks require charging, holding the joystick in a particular direction for a minimum amount of time, at which point the special attack is primed and ready to execute if you successfully input the remaining requirements. Guile specifically has 2 charge-based special attacks. One of these is his Sonic Boom projectile. To charge a Sonic Boom, you hold away from the opponent. Guile's other charge-based special is his Somersault Kick, also known as a Flash Kick or Blade Kick. To charge a Flash Kick, you hold down. Okay, that's all you need to know for now, but you'll soon see why this is critical information. I should also note that Guile's glitches have different names in different parts of the world. I'll mostly call them by the names we used locally. Starting with glitch number 2, the Golden Stance, also known as just stance. If you hold left or right and press Fierce Kick within a close enough distance to the opponent, then Guile will execute his bizarre upside down kick. That on its own wasn't weird enough for Guile though, so he thought, hey, what if I strike a pose afterwards? To get into stance, charge a Sonic Boom, and then during the upside down kick, release that Sonic Boom by pressing toward and a punch button. If you time it right, Guile will get stuck in the last phase of the upside down kick's animation. The timing window here is fairly generous. As long as you don't release the Sonic Boom too early, within 6 frames of starting the upside down kick, or too late, when Guile is just a couple of frames away from completing the kick, then you'll get the glitch. But why does Guile get stuck like this? Maybe you think, like I did, that the game tries to execute the Sonic Boom, but because the kick attack is already started, the Sonic Boom fails, and the input instead throws the animation sequence off. This potential explanation, while a great hunch, raises some more questions. For example, why is the glitch specific to the upside down kick? None of Guile's other attacks glitch in this way. Actually, that's not technically true, but we'll come back to that point later. And why would it cause Guile to get stuck at the end of the animation specifically? Okay, maybe it's not the complete explanation then, but it's a sensible starting point. It seems clear, after all, that something about the Sonic Boom input is a key contributing factor. Let's take a deeper look at what's going on. Our first 2 clues come from testing what happens when we try the exact same glitch setup, but with other kicks. Guile's kicks differ depending on which kick button is pressed and his distance from the opponent. But, crucially, none of the other kicks glitch. Or any punches for that matter. It's only the upside down kick that gets stuck like this. That suggests that there's something unique about the upside down kick. Our second clue comes from looking at the underlying code that's running during these various kick setups. Setups that are identical other than which kick button is pressed. From looking at the code, we find that there's only one key difference all the way up to the moment that the Sonic Boom is attempted. And that difference is just a number that the game uses to identify, along with a couple of other variables, which kind of attack is happening. For the upside down kick, that number is 6. And it turns out that 6, and only 6, is going to make all the difference. Next, let's consider what happens when the sonic boom is attempted during the kick. The good news is that our earlier theory about the sonic boom failing here was correct, but the way it plays out is ultimately quite different. A sonic boom's basic input requirements are as follows. First, charge the sonic boom by holding away from the opponent for at least 60 frames. Second, stop charging. At this moment, the game starts a countdown, and the third sonic boom input requirement must be met before that countdown reaches 0. In actual play, it's unlikely you'd even notice this requirement, because most people just immediately forge straight ahead to that third requirement, pressing towards the opponent. Now, the game replaces the old countdown with a new one, and then the fourth and final requirement, a punch, needs to be pressed before this new countdown reaches 0. There is a little extra nuance with this last countdown that's important for another glitch, so we'll come back to it later. If that final punch button is pressed within 5 frames of another attack starting, then the game will interrupt that attack and switch over to executing a sonic boom. But if the punch button is pressed 6 or more frames after another attack starting, then that attack is already locked in, and the sonic boom instead fails. So, our hypothesis was right up to this point. The sonic boom does indeed fail. But there's a little more to the explanation than that. When the punch button gets pressed, another thing the code does here is to make a mental note that it should look up the punch-related instructions when figuring out what to do. Unfortunately, or fortunately if you love glitches, this mental note overwrites the previous note that was set by the fierce kick button press that started the upside down kick. That note had said to look up kick-related instructions. So, the game has switched from looking up and running code that has to do with kicks to looking up and running code that has to do with punches. And without any way to switch it back, it will continue to do this all the way through the kicks animation and beyond. Now, we reach the critical moment. The sonic boom's conditions have not been met, so it fails. But the game doesn't just give up there. It tries to figure out what attack it should run instead. The game looks at the punch-related area to determine what it should do next. But it's a big area. How does the game know where in that area to find the right instructions? The answer is that it uses the identifying number we talked about earlier, which hasn't changed, and is meant to pinpoint which kick attack is happening. A fork happens at this point. If the starting attack wasn't the upside down kick, that is, the identifying number is anything other than 6, then the game shoots off down instruction pathways that, despite being meant for various type of punch-based attacks, will all correctly animate and then exit Guile back to an ordinary state. But if the number is 6, the upside down kick's number, then the game goes down a different punch-based pathway. And if you're familiar with Guile's glitches in Street Fighter 2, you can probably guess what punch-based move the number 6 refers to. It's his throw. And the instructions on this particular path are different. There's an instruction that checks whether Guile's throw has successfully connected with the opponent. Ordinarily, this gets set somewhere else earlier on by a separate hit detection system. The problem is, it is not set when we arrive here via this glitchy, kick-punch swapping, sonic boom failing craziness. And because Guile is now locked in an attack animation, it will never connect. That code is on a separate pathway, so no throw can happen. But there's an additional side effect. The code path here never gets to any instructions that tell Guile how to exit the kick animation. The result of all this madness is that the game continues to animate the upside down kick, but when Guile gets to the last position of that animation, he gets stuck. Much like the glitch with the car, we're now in another infinite loop. The difference here is that you can get yourself out of stance. Just charge and release a flash kick. This switches the game back over to taking the kick-based instruction paths, and you'll be back in the action. And there you have it. A kick with a specific identification number starts running. Then, during a failed sonic boom, the game switches from looking up kick instructions to instead looking up punch instructions. The upside down kick's identification number sends the game over to some throw instructions, which will never make the throw connect and cannot tell Guile how to exit the stance. There's a couple of quick points to note about the stance glitch before we move on. First, it's not all that useful. There's a couple of opponents who are so thoroughly beguiled that they can't even hit you. But otherwise, it's just showmanship. Second, all of Guile's other glitches can be achieved from this state, and one in particular even requires stance as a prerequisite. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll come back to stance when it's relevant. Glitch number 3. Handcuffs, also known as freeze. Start by charging up a flash kick. Next, make sure your opponent is within throwing distance. Then, press forward or back or up and strong punch to start a throw. Immediately follow up by pressing up and any kick button to try and perform a flash kick. When done correctly, Guile will continue through his throw animation, but the opponent won't take any damage, and they become handcuffed or frozen in place next to Guile, stuck in the first phase of a taking damage animation. If you break down the sequence of inputs here and think about what we've already learned from the stance glitch, you'll probably have a good idea for a possible explanation. In the stance glitch, we were interrupting a kick-based attack, the upside down kick, with a punch-based charge move, the sonic boom. Here, we're doing the opposite, interrupting a punch-based attack, the throw, with a kick-based charge move, the flash kick. But again, this explanation feels incomplete, because the outcomes aren't the same across the two glitches. In stance, Guile gets stuck in the last part of his animation and doesn't recover. In handcuffs, the throw animation completes and Guile does recover. In stance, the kick can hit the opponent. In handcuffs, the throw looks like it connects, the opponent gets grabbed, but then they don't take any damage. And finally, why does the opponent get handcuffed or frozen next to Guile? Let's start by checking whether our hunch is right, that there's some similarity between this glitch and stance. Where to begin? Well, remember how the stance glitch is unique to the upside down kick? Maybe we should first check if the handcuffs glitch is unique to the throw. If we use the same setups and just change which punch move Guile does, we find that, yes, handcuffs requires the throw move specifically. We also learn from this little experiment that there's one other punch-based attack that glitches when using this input pattern, but it does something different to handcuffs, so we'll come back to it later. Now, when we start the throw, the game sets up the attack's identifier, which, as we've already learned, is 6. Then, it makes a couple of extra mental notes. First, that Guile's throw has started, and second, that the opponent is being thrown. The throw is successfully underway, but not for long. Let's see what happens next when the flash kick's input requirements are met. Those requirements are essentially the same as a sonic boom's, but at the third step, up needs to be pressed rather than toward, and then kick needs to be pressed rather than punch. So, the game detects that a kick button is pressed and makes a mental note to look up the kick-related instructions from now on. So far, the lead up to the glitch is practically the same as it was for stance. An attack is made, it has a particular value, 6, and then an attempted charge move switches where the game should find instructions for that attack. There is one subtle difference. You don't need to wait for 5 frames, like we did in stance, before performing the final button press. The flash kick is going to fail anyway. That's a consequence of the way throws work. They can't be interrupted in the same way that regular attacks can. Anyway, can you guess where the game ends up finding its instructions? The attack identifier number is the same one we've been looking at all along, 6, so the game starts running upside down kick instructions instead of throw instructions. The code that handles the upside down kick tells the game to cycle through the attack's animation and, when done, exit out of it to give control back to the player. Pretty standard stuff. The problem is that Guile is trying to perform a throw, and a throw isn't like a regular attack. It has separate phases that require their own unique handling, and therefore some specific instructions. One instruction, for example, advances the phase the throw is in. And because we've moved over to running upside down kick instructions, that code never runs. That's why only the first phase of the throw happens. This also explains why the throw does no damage. The code controlling damage happens at a later phase of the throw, once Guile lets go of the opponent. The glitch ensures that we never get to that phase, and therefore the handcuffs throw does no damage. The result is that the throw connects, the first phase animates, and then it exits out, returning Guile to a normal state. The opponent, however, is permanently stuck next to Guile in the first frame of their being thrown animation because the code responsible for handling the phases of that animation also never runs. The handcuffs glitch is a little more useful than the stance, but it also has its own problems. Probably its greatest strength is that the opponent literally cannot do anything. They're stuck with you until you choose to let them go. You're free to move around, practice moves and glitches, whatever you want. Completely disabling the opponent probably sounds great, but here's the problem. You can't hit them. When the game puts the opponent in the being thrown state, it disables their vulnerability rectangles, and the code to get them back again is in a later phase of the throw, which never runs. Probably worse than that, though, is that you need to get back out of this glitch before the timer runs out. The game cannot progress with the opponent stuck like this, so if the timer reaches 0, you have to reset the game. How do you get out of handcuffs then? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because the answer is with another glitch. We'll come back to that soon, but first, let's go over that other glitch that uses this same setup, just with a different punch attack. Glitch number 4. Reset. Just like handcuffs, start by charging up a flash kick. Then, with the opponent in throwing range, press forward, or back or up, and fierce punch to start Guile's other throw, the suplex. Immediately follow up by pressing up and any kick button to try and perform a flash kick. If you get it right, you'll be rewarded with the game completely resetting. Okay, admittedly this is not the most useful glitch if you just want to play the game, but it's interesting to think about why the reset happens. Consider what we've learned so far. In the stance glitch, the upside down kick, identified by the number 6, was interrupted with a failed sonic boom, switching the game into running code for the punch attack, identified by the number 6. That's the throw. In the handcuffs glitch, it was the opposite. The throw, also identified by that number 6, was interrupted with a failed flash kick, switching the game into running code for the kick attack, identified by the number 6, which is the upside down kick. So, in order to understand what's going on here, it probably makes sense to first figure out what specific number identifies the suplex attack. Looking at the code, we find that the answer is 7. That's interesting. 7 is a number we haven't seen yet. So, the game starts executing punch attack 7, the suplex, but then the flash kick switches the game into running code for the kick attack, identified by the number 7. And that's a problem, because there is no kick attack identified by the number 7. The game doesn't know that though, it just uses the identifying number to figure out where it should look in the code to find its instructions. A value of 7, however, causes the game to look beyond the range of normal instructions. In fact, it ends up looking in the middle of 2 instructions. The game interprets this as a totally different instruction, one that says to change an area in memory that lets the game know what state it's in. You can think of this area in memory acting like a guide. Every frame, the game asks the guide what it's supposed to be doing. Am I in a battle? Or heading to the next one? Or has the player lost? And so on. So, on the very next frame, the game consults the guide to figure out where it should go next for more instructions. But the problem is that the guide now tells the game to go find its instructions in a place it can't actually get to. You see, Street Fighter II runs on a specific type of processor, the Motorola 68K, and this processor requires all its instructions to come from even-numbered places. Our corrupted game state, our guide, tells the game to head to an address with an odd number. That immediately triggers what's called an exception, a way to interrupt the flow of instructions, often used when something goes wrong. This exception sends the game down the reset pathway. So there you go. It is ultimately the same underlying bug, but with a different outcome. The suplex throw starts, it gets interrupted by a failed flash kick that causes the game to run instructions in a place where it's not supposed to ever go. The first instruction at that place corrupts the game mode, and the game freaks out and resets. There's not really any reason to do this glitch, except maybe to show that you have some arcane knowledge of an ancient game, I suppose, or maybe if you want to annoy a real opponent. But then, if that's your goal, it's probably this next glitch that you really want to master. Glitch number 5, the Invisible Throw, also known as Magic Throw. Probably the most infamous of all of Guile's glitches, and for good reason. If you played World Warrior a lot, you got good enough to be able to pull off chains of this glitch. 4 in a row, and your opponent goes from full health to dead, and there isn't a single thing they can do to stop you. Frowned upon big time against real opponents, for obvious reasons, but funny as hell otherwise. So, how do you do it? Well, there's a few variations that work, but the basics are as follows. Start by charging up a sonic boom. Then, when the opponent is within range of the upside down kick, hold forward and then press fierce kick. Then, immediately press fierce punch. The timing here is tight. You have to move for between 9 and 13 frames, and the punch has to be pressed exactly 1 frame after the kick. When input correctly, Guile throws the opponent without ever having to physically grab them. Unlike the Handcuffs glitch, however, invisible throws will deal damage to the opponent. They are also completely unavoidable and unstoppable. The only real defense against this glitch is to stay out of its range. But cheesiness aside, why does this particular sequence happen? Why doesn't the opponent get grabbed like in a normal throw? Why are they instead able to move around and attack normally for a decent chunk of the time that Guile's throw is animating? Why is the throw unstoppable? Or put another way, if you see it coming, why can't you quickly attack Guile to stop it? Let's figure this out. Thankfully, we've already learned a bunch of useful information that'll help us out here. Our first clue is that the invisible throw has a lot in common with the stance glitch. Charge up a sonic boom, start an upside down kick, interrupt it with a failed sonic boom, and the resulting outcome is buggy. Our second clue is that, again, just like stance, the glitch only happens with the upside down kick. That identifying number 6 again, and the switch from running kick instructions to running punch instructions, means that the game ends up running code for the throw instead of the upside down kick. But in other ways, the invisible throw seems to have different requirements. These raise a couple of additional questions we'll need to answer too if we want a good explanation. First, why does this glitch require a minimum number of frames of movement before starting the attack? Second, why does it require fierce punch specifically and not just any punch button? Luckily, we can answer both these questions at the same time. Let's start by running an experiment similar to the ones we ran earlier. We'll keep the inputs identical, but switch out which punch button is pressed and watch what happens. From this experiment, we learn some valuable information. We can immediately see that fierce punch leads to an invisible throw, while strong or weak punch instead lead to sonic booms. That's a little strange because in all 3 cases the game should still be using the upside down kick's identifying number, 6, to find where in the punch area it's supposed to look for instructions. If we dig a little deeper and examine the code, we can resolve this discrepancy. Across our different setups, everything is exactly the same, code-wise, until the punch button is pressed. 1 frame before that, when the kick button was pressed, the game, as we'd expect, sets the attack identifier number to 6. The upside down kick. It also does the required proximity checks and so on, setting the move active. Then, the punch button triggers the parts of code responsible for managing sonic booms. Here, the game checks which of the 3 punch buttons was pressed. That makes sense. The sonic booms have different speeds depending on which punch button you use, after all. But, as it turns out, this check is actually about timing. Remember that when you meet the 3rd requirement of the sonic boom, the toward press, the game starts a countdown. And if you don't press a punch before this countdown reaches 0, you can't execute a sonic boom. That makes sense too. You wouldn't want players to be able to, say, walk halfway across the screen and still fire off a sonic boom. Although if that does sound like fun to you, definitely check out the Rainbow Edition revisions of Street Fighter 2. What's surprising is that the amount of time you have to do a sonic boom varies based on the type of punch used. Fierce punch has the strictest time requirements, then strong punch, and then weak punch. I had absolutely no idea until I saw this code that the different sonic booms had different timing windows. It's such a small difference that I guess I never noticed it in-game. Anyway, what's more important is that this timing restriction tells us why Fierce Punch and Strong Punch and Weak Punch have different outcomes. 9 frames after meeting the third input requirement, the toward press, the countdown timer has reached a point where a Fierce Punch Sonic Boom is no longer possible. It fails, and so something else happens instead. And by the way, what this also tells us is that it is in fact possible to perform an invisible throw using the Strong Punch button. You just need to wait 11 frames from the forward press before you start the attack button sequence. By then, the countdown timer will have reached a point where the Strong Punch Sonic Boom will also fail. It seems, however, that you can't ever perform a Weak Punch invisible throw, because another 2 frames later, when its threshold is reached, the game resets the whole Sonic Boom process. So, a Fierce Punch does not switch to a Sonic Boom move. That's one puzzle solved. But what does it do instead? Well, the game returns from the Sonic Boom area of code and carries on figuring out what attack it should do. Here, it reads that number 6 again, set by the Fierce Kick button 1 frame earlier. And because it's now looking at punch instructions, it begins carrying out Guile's throw. Ordinarily, that requires a bunch of checks first. How close we are to the opponent, what state they're in, and so on. But because we arrived here by hijacking an upside down kick, we've bypassed all of those checks. The key difference between the invisible throw and the stance glitch is that the punch input for an invisible throw happens immediately after the kick is pressed, before the kick animation has a chance to get underway. The game is still able, on this 1 frame, to switch to the punch-based move and an animation, which for identification number 6 is the throw. We can verify this by testing what happens if you wait just 1 frame longer between the kick input and the punch input. The kick animation locks in, and Guile ends up in stance. And now we can answer another question. The reason the opponent doesn't get grabbed at the start of the throw is because we bypassed all the normal throw checks and skipped straight into its animation. In fact, the opponent is free until a very specific moment, when the throw advances to phase 2, where ordinarily Guile lets go of the opponent. It's at this point that the game makes a note that the attack has hit, something that was impossible in the stance glitch, and this note in turn cues up the opponent's animation and damage sequences. The throw phases are basically functionally separate. Consider for a moment, as broken as this bug is, how much more broken it would be if one of Guile's other kicks was coded with the number 6. Most kicks don't have a range requirement, meaning you'd literally be able to pull the move off from anywhere. Invisible throws are ridiculous enough as they are. You can change which direction you throw the opponent, which allows you to keep them within range and chain throws together. You can pull the opponent out of mid-air. You can even pull Vega off the cage. The invisible throw has one other useful property too. It's how you uncuff your opponent from the handcuffs glitch. Ultimately, despite some very different outcomes, these glitches all have the same underlying cause. A charged special move input interrupts another attack and causes the game to run instructions for the wrong type of move. That one critical bug can lead to animations getting stuck, throws not properly executing, the entire game resetting, and throws out of thin air. But there's one last glitch, and it's definitely my favourite, that I rarely see mentioned anywhere. I suspect that part of the reason why is that it is difficult to make it happen, so not as many people know about it. I have hazy, ancient memories of seeing it a handful of times in the arcades, and no one really seemed to know exactly how it happened, but there sure was a lot of superstition about it. Compare that to Guile's other glitches, which were so well known that almost everyone with an interest in the game was able to do them. Okay, enough bloviating, let's dig into this final glitch. Fair warning, this one gets kinda complicated. Glitch number 6, Invincibility. With the right sequence of inputs, Guile becomes completely invincible. He can't be hit with attacks, projectiles will phase straight through him, he can't be thrown, he just stands there, frozen in time and space, impervious. Smug little. This glitch needs a fairly specific setup. First, get into stance, then charge up both a sonic boom and a flash kick by holding down and away. Then make sure that the opponent is within the upside down kick distance. Now, The exact setup for the next input sequence can vary somewhat, and you'll see why when we get to the glitch's explanation, but for now, here's one variation that works. 1 frame with no input, 1 frame toward, 1 frame up, 6 frames of no input, up and fierce kick together for 1 frame, fierce punch and fierce kick together for 1 frame. That sequence starts an invisible throw, but it's a throw that doesn't affect the opponent. But we're not quite done yet. Immediately begin charging a sonic boom. Then, as Guile is recovering from the throw animation into his standing position, release the sonic boom just before he gets there. If you somehow manage to do all of that, then congratulations, you are now invincible. Guile will remain frozen in the last part of his recovering from the throw animation. And in this state, he is completely invulnerable. No wind or waterfall can stall him. If the input sequence seems daunting, don't worry too much. There are certain tricks you can do if you're a little dexterous that'll help. As we explore the explanation, you'll see what I mean. So, now we know how to make Guile invincible, but we don't know why. What's really going on here? Well, there are a number of questions we'll need to address if we really want to understand this glitch. First, why does it need to start from the stance glitch? Second, why are both charge moves needed? Third, what's going on with the convoluted input pattern? Fourth, why is the trigger for the invisible throw here different, requiring both fierce punch and fierce kick? And finally, and most importantly, why does the final sonic boom input cause Guile to become invincible? Let's take a look at each of these questions. The stance prerequisite. First, let's remind ourselves what happens in the stance glitch. A sonic boom is charged, an upside down kick is started, it's interrupted by a failed sonic boom, which causes the game to run instructions that are meant for Guile's throw while he's performing the kick. Those throw instructions have no way for Guile to exit the upside down kick animation, so he gets stuck in its last phase. And it looks to us like nothing more is happening at that point. But what we don't see is that the game is actually still in an infinite loop, running the same set of throw instructions that don't really do anything every frame. The only way Guile can break out of this loop is if he does something that interrupts that flow. A flash kick does exactly that. It switches the game back over to running kick instructions, allowing ordinary game flow to resume. So, let's keep the following fact in mind as we build this explanation. While Guile is in stance, a flash kick is a tool to get the game to switch from running punch instructions to running kick instructions. And that is why the stance glitch is a prerequisite, because at one particular point, we're going to need to make that switch. The double charge. Okay, so if we want to get Guile out of stance, we know we'll need the flash kick, and the consequence is that we'll switch the game from running punch instructions to running kick instructions. But hold on, in order to get the invincibility glitch, it looks as though we need Guile to perform a throw, a punch-based instruction, when he exits stance. That's a problem. The flash kick is the tool Guile has to break out of stance, but the sonic boom is the tool Guile has to get to the throw instructions, because it can switch the game over from running kick instructions to running punch instructions. It seems then that we need to be able to do both types of switches for the invincibility glitch to work. And that's why we need to charge both the flash kick and the sonic boom. The input sequence nightmare. The inputs leading to the invincibility glitch probably look daunting or just plain confusing the first time you see them. But if we break it down, you'll see that there's really only 4 parts to this sequence. The first part, the toward and up button presses, start both the sonic boom and the flash kick countdown timers. The second part is a pause. It's just long enough that the sonic boom countdown passes the timing window threshold for fierce punch, ensuring that, later on, Guile will fail to release a sonic boom. This is just like in the invisible throw glitch. The third part of the sequence is the fierce kick. It breaks Guile out of the stance and switches the game from running punch instructions to running kick instructions. The fourth part of the sequence is the fierce kick and fierce punch together. This part is probably the most confusing, because we haven't encountered it before. What's happening here? When we covered the invisible throw glitch earlier, we saw that when a fierce punch was pressed on its own, 1 frame after an upside down kick, the game swapped over to running throw instructions. But here, in the invincibility setup, that is not what happens. If we try fierce punch on its own, or no input at all, Guile instead just does a flash kick. So we need to consider what's different here compared to the invisible throw setup. Well, in the invisible throw setup, the frame with the fierce kick input sets Guile up to do an upside down kick. But in this invincibility setup, we have a flash kick charged, and so the frame with the fierce kick input runs through the flash kick code. What we don't see, however, unless we look at the code, is that this flash kick actually fails on the frame the button is pressed. That's because the upside down kick attack that we use to get into stance is still, every frame, advancing its how long since the attack started timer. Remember that timer? It's the one that, if you perform a charged special move before it reaches 6, allows that special move to replace the attack. By the time we press fierce kick here, the timer's value is much greater than 6, and so the flash kick fails. The game carries on figuring out what attack to do instead, and ends up setting the attack as, you probably guessed it, another upside down kick. But wait a minute. If the flash kick failed, and Guile's starting to do an upside down kick, then why does he end up doing a flash kick if we press only a fierce punch on the very next frame? The answer is that the game pays attention not only to button presses, but also to button releases. And it runs through the same code to determine what to do for both. So, if fierce kick is released on the frame after it was pressed, the game runs another flash kick check. And because we've just reset the attack timer by starting a new upside down kick, this time the check succeeds. The upside down kick gets replaced with a flash kick. That, however, is not what we want to happen. What we want is to use the fierce punch to trigger an invisible throw, because that's the next part of the invincibility sequence. So we need to prevent the game from replacing the upside down kick with a flash kick. And that's why fierce kick and fierce punch are pressed together. The game sees this as a new punch button press and no new kick button press or release. It therefore runs through the sonic boom code, which fails because the threshold timer has gone past the acceptable time window for a fierce punch sonic boom. The game therefore switches over to running punch instructions for the attack with the identifying number of 6, triggering the invisible throw. But we're not done yet. There are still 2 puzzles left. One is that we need to understand why this invisible throw does no damage. In fact, it seems to have absolutely no effect on the opponent at all. The other puzzle is that we need to understand why Guile ends up frozen in place when a sonic boom is attempted during the throw's recovery animation. The solution to both puzzles is surprisingly simple. Let's start with the throw. At this moment in time in the game, we have fierce punch and fierce kick both pressed, and the game has switched over to running punch, specifically throw, instructions. On the very next frame, we release both buttons. The game processes both, but it does it in order, punches first, then kicks. And that means we switch back again to running kick instructions. Which ones? Yep, the upside down kick, because the attack identifier is still 6. The upside down kick instructions will never be able to tell the throw's phase to advance, or to animate and damage the enemy. All it can do is run through the animation and then return Guile to normal. Suppose for a moment you did want the throw here to be the normal invisible throw glitch. What do we need for that to happen? Well, we'd need the game to keep running throw instructions and to not switch back to running kick instructions. And there's 2 ways to make that happen. You can simply continue to hold down fierce kick until the flash kick timer completely resets, which then prevents the game from switching back to kick instructions. Alternatively, you could release fierce kick, but then release fierce punch 1 frame later. That will cause a flip-flop from punch to kick and then back to punch again. Both these options result in a normal invisible throw glitch. We're not after that here though. We want the game to be running kick instructions while in the throw animation, because that's how we're going to solve the last part of the puzzle, the final sonic boom, getting Guile stuck in the last part of his throw recovery animation. There is just enough time for Guile to charge a sonic boom from when he enters the throw to when he recovers. And when we release that sonic boom, it fails because the throw's animation timer value is much greater than 6 by this point, but more importantly, it also switches the game one last time back to running punch instructions. That might seem like it would be unhelpful at this point, because if the attack identifier number is 6, and we're now running punch-based instructions, then the game should be running throw instructions. So why doesn't it just continue to animate and have Guile recover? The answer is that we've come full circle. We are in exactly the same kind of situation we were in with Guile getting stuck in stance. Yes, the game is running instructions to do with the throw, but it's just looping endlessly because the throw has contacted status was never set. And just like with stance, there is no way to get to any return Guile to normal code. The end result is, for the most part, the same. In both stance and invincibility, Guile ends up stuck in the last phase of an attack's animation. That leaves just one last question. Why is Guile invincible in this state when he isn't in stance? Thankfully, given the roller coaster we've just been on, the answer is really straightforward. Let me turn the rectangles back on to illustrate. That's it. It's simply because a character has no vulnerability rectangles when they are in a throw state. And that means, as long as Guile remains frozen like this, he is completely impervious. So, now we have the full explanation. Let's put it all together. We charge both a sonic boom and a flash kick while in stance. The animation timer that's running while we're in stance ensures that the flash kick fails on its first attempt and instead sets the attack as the upside down kick, giving us that magic identifying number of 6. On the very next frame, we switch the game over to running throw instructions with a failed sonic boom. We release fierce kick on the next frame to trigger another flash kick check, which also fails, but switches the game back to running kick instructions. Finally, we release a failed sonic boom to switch back to running punch instructions. That locks Guile in a loop of code that prevents the throw animation from exiting and prevents Guile's vulnerability rectangles from returning. Given the fairly complicated sequence of inputs, you might want to write this one off as unrealistic. And fair enough. But for those of you who like a challenge, let me offer a couple of tips that might help. First, it's easier if you have access to a proper fight stick. Second, you can make it a little easier on yourself by adjusting how you enter the inputs. Specifically, once you've got the sonic boom and flash kick charged, you can roll the joystick in a semicircle from down and away to up and toward, and you can keep it there until you need to start charging the final sonic boom. The next challenge is getting the timing of the attack buttons right. This has to start between 9 and 12 frames after the joystick movement begins, and the fierce punch has to be pressed exactly 1 frame after fierce kick. The best way to get a feel for that timing is to learn the invisible throw first, because it has the same timing window. You also can't hold the attack buttons too long, or you'll fail to trigger the second flash kick check that switches the game back to running kick instructions. If you can manage to get all of that together, you're past the biggest hurdles. All you have to do at that point is remember to immediately start charging the final sonic boom, and time it to release just before Guile recovers from the throw animation. If Guile stays in this state, then the game will be unable to progress when the stage timer reaches 0. You can break out of invincibility, however, just like you can with stance, by performing a flash kick. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. Setting aside the bonus stage glitch with the car, which has its own explanation, we can see that all of Guile's glitches share one fundamental issue. The game provides a window of opportunity for charged moves to interrupt other attacks. But when these charged moves fail, the game has already switched to looking for instructions that match the type of attack, punch or kick, and it doesn't remember to switch back. While I was exploring these glitches, I continue to be surprised at how they all led back to this one underlying explanation. It seems like such a simple process, and yet it's the base reason for so many different buggy outcomes. So now, 35 years later, I finally understand what's really going on in these glitches in this game. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.